Hey guys, it's Brooks here. I'm standing in our worship center, obviously here at First Baptist Church of the Islands, and wanted to bring you this morning's 5 for 5 devotional from this very spot. And the reason for that is I have a question for you, and the question is one for you to think about. Maybe this is kind of early in the morning for you, but I'm sure you can get through this little thinking exercise. Think about this for a moment. Does the mission of God stop, or does it cease for a season when God's people are not able to meet together publicly? Obviously, we, along with most every other single church in this country, have been unable to meet publicly and to gather because of COVID-19. And it does beg the question, so does the mission of God continue forward, or does it cease also if the church is not able to meet publicly? Well, I think that's a question worth thinking about. And for me, I was pondering that question this week, and my answer to that question of whether or not the mission ceases just because we're not meeting together is both yes and no. I think you have to answer it both ways. Yes, the mission does cease if you and I don't answer the call, right? Because a building never reached a person, a building never accomplished the mission. What is the mission to begin with? Well, Jesus tells us in the book of Matthew, and Matthew's quoting Jesus here in chapter 22. Listen to what he says in Matthew 22, verse 37. Jesus has been asked a question about which is the greatest commandment of all. And he says in verse 37, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind." And so when you think about, well, what is the mission of God? Is the mission of God to pack out a worship center every Sunday? That's not the mission. The mission is to help people to grow to love God with everything that we are. That is part of the mission. And yet the mission also extends further than that. Jesus would say 2 verses later in Matthew, in that chapter 22, he would also say, and the second commandment is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, for us, we have put together what we feel as a church ministry, a mission statement that is geared really around those two passages or 2 verses in Matthew 22. One is that we try to lead people to love Jesus authentically from the heart. And number 2, we try to lead people to serve others selflessly, right? To love our neighbor as ourselves. Well, at the end of Matthew's gospel in chapter 28, before Jesus ascended to heaven, he would also say to go and to preach the gospel to all the nations, right? That we are to go and to baptize and to make disciples, and that he goes with us everywhere we go. And so when you think about the mission of the church, what is the mission of the church? Well, it is to love God, to love him with everything we are, and it's to serve others selflessly, to love our neighbor as ourselves, and it's to make disciples. It's to go with the message of the gospel. So can we do that if we're not meeting together publicly? Absolutely, yes. The mission doesn't end just because we're not meeting together. And so when you ask the question, so does the mission of God cease just because we're not publicly gathering for worship? No, it doesn't cease. Not if we're doing what God's called us to do, but if we sit back and just do nothing, and we don't cultivate a deeper relationship with God and his word and in prayer, and if we don't demonstrate love for our neighbor as we serve them, and if we don't share the gospel and pray evangelistically for other people, and if we don't look to make disciples, then that mission is never going to be accomplished. You know, I think we understand a little better why it says in Hebrews not to forsake assembling of ourselves together, because it's a lot easier to stay encouraged when we're meeting together face to face. In these days we can't. Man, the mission doesn't cease. It only ceases if you and I cease to do the things that Jesus said matter most, to love him with everything we are, and to love our neighbor and to serve our neighbor as ourselves, and to go make disciples. So what can you do today, right, to help you to love God a little more deeply, to serve somebody else a little more selflessly, and to help accomplish the molding and the making of another follower of Jesus? You do that today, and do it tomorrow, and let's do it the next day. And when we get back together, it may be a little easier because we're going to be a little more encouraged. But let's trust the results to God. Hope you have a great day today. God bless you.